Thank you very much, Vedji, for the kind introduction, and namaste to everyone here today. It's my honor and privilege to be speaking with all of you here on such an important occasion and such an important gathering and such a critical topic. My colleague here, Sri Sadanand Sito, gave a very passionate and fiery speech about the human rights work that they do, and I have great admiration for the work that GHRD does. And he gave a good summary of the work they do on the ground in countries such as Pakistan and Bangladesh. What I like to focus on is a little bit different aspect of it, and that is the advocacy work in the country that I live in and our organization is in, which is the US as the Hindu American Foundation. So just to give you just a little bit about the Hindu American Foundation, we are a nonprofit advocacy organization that provides a voice for the more than 3 million Hindu Americans. We educate the public about Hinduism, speak out about issues affecting Hindus worldwide, and we focus on human and civil rights, public policy, media, academia, and interfaith relations. Human rights advocacy is one of the key aspects of the work that we do, and I just want to share a small story with you, a short story with you as to the importance of the advocacy work that needs to be done. About 10 years ago, Vedji referred to the organization being around for a little over the 10 years. 10 years ago, when we walked the halls of Congress in the most powerful capital of the world, we went and we presented ourselves as the Hindu American Foundation. We had a number of meetings with senators, congressmen, and we told them that we represent the Hindu American community. And during one of those meetings, one of my colleagues, when he described that he represents the Hindu American community, he was asked, "So are you a Sunni or a Shia?" So that just tells you the level of ignorance that we're dealing with and what we have to overcome, not only to educate them, our policymakers that represent us, both in terms of domestic policy, but also international human rights, foreign policy, and religious freedom issues. But just educating them on what a Hindu is and then getting Hindu issues into the conversation. For so long, nobody talked about the issues dealing with Hindus in countries such as Pakistan, Bangladesh, and many others. And so the battle that we've been fighting for more than 10 years, and that is so many years to go, is to make sure that these issues take front and center stage on our issues. And I'm saying that not just as a Hindu, as an American, and as somebody whose roots are in Bharat, but also as an American citizen that pays taxes, and to see where my tax dollars are going. I don't want my tax dollars going to a regime in Pakistan that is supporting the oppression of Hindu minorities. So getting that dialogue going, educating our policymakers is the first step in trying to change things. So a little bit about the human rights advocacy work that we do. We publish annual human rights reports that document violations against Hindus globally. And this takes the form of many countries: Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, Saudi Arabia, and many others. We build relations with government officials, and we advocate for policy changes towards countries that persecute Hindus. So I'm not going to talk too much about Bangladesh because my colleague already spoke about that a little bit. But what I do want to say is, in the US, there has been a narrative that has been successfully portrayed by those in Bangladesh that are supporting the repression of minorities and an Islamist rule. Jamaat-e-Islami in particular has successfully lobbied the US government. They have hired one of the most powerful lobbying firms in the US to advocate and to lobby on behalf of their interests, portraying Jamaat-e-Islami as victims of political repression. But you never hear about the issues that are affecting Hindus. But for the first time last year, we successfully advocated for a congressional hearing on Bangladesh, where the actual focus of the hearing were the rights of Hindu minorities. This hearing was just about the time where there was election violence going on in Bangladesh. And so those issues took center stage. And we actually had one of the most powerful committees, the House Foreign Affairs Committee, one of their subcommittees examining the election violence against Hindus and the role of Jamaat-e-Islami. So this was obviously a long way to go, but one of the first steps in actually getting these issues on the desk of policymakers and having them actively look into it. Another example on a country that we work on is Bhutan. Everybody knows about Bhutan as a country who has exported gross national happiness. But from my Bhutanese Hindu friends, it is a country of gross national hypocrisy. Because in the early 1990s, the Bhutanese government ethnically cleansed more than 100,000 Bhutanese Hindus from the south of Bhutan who are ethnically Nepali and practice Hinduism. There's some small sects of Buddhism also that were affected, but the majority were Hindus. There was an ethnic cleansing campaign that led to the burning of ethnic Nepali Hindu homes, torture, arrests, rape of women, and other atrocities. As a result, these Hindus were forced to flee and were living in United Nations administered refugee camps in Nepal for more than 20 years. For more than 20 years, the Bhutanese government refused to repatriate any of these refugees. Nobody from the international community was able to effectively convince them to repatriate these refugees. In 2007, several countries started to agree to resettle these refugees, and the US was one of them. Now there are nearly 80,000 Bhutanese Hindus living in America. Unfortunately, they have not been able to partake in the American dream. After living through ethnic cleansing and then life in the camps, they now are in the US where they face other challenges, where they have the highest suicide rate for any group in the country, any group in the world. They deal with mental health issues on a regular basis. They deal with language barriers. They deal with economic issues. And these Bhutanese Hindus, for the first time, we were able to give them a platform in the United States government. Earlier this week, on Monday, Hindu American Foundation hosted a Bhutan Advocacy Day on Capitol Hill for Bhutanese Hindus, where we invited Bhutanese Hindu leaders from across the country to advocate on issues for their community that affected them both domestically in the US as well as internationally, making sure that the Bhutanese government seriously takes the repatriation of those Bhutanese Hindus that want to return to Bhutan as an issue on their agenda, that look into the rights of those Hindus that are still remaining in Bhutan. Bhutanese Hindus still cannot worship freely, they cannot build temples freely, they cannot practice their faith freely. The Nepali language has been banned in many schools, and they face a number of other cultural and economic discrimination, a number of other forms of economic and cultural discrimination. And coupled with that Bhutanese Advocacy Day, we held a congressional briefing that we did in collaboration with the chair of the Nepal caucus. We're led by 2 congressmen, 1 Democrat and 1 Republican. We brought to life these issues that were plaguing these Bhutanese Hindus. And one of these Bhutanese Hindus so eloquently stated that he never imagined when he was driven out of Bhutan that he would one day come to the halls of power in America to speak off on behalf of not only Bhutanese in America, but Bhutanese Hindus worldwide. Malaysia in the West is often described as a model Muslim democracy in Southeast Asia. There couldn't be anything farther from the truth. Currently in Malaysia, there's an apartheid system that treats those that are not Muslim Malays differently. Muslim Malays get economic benefits, and they get other legal rights that are not available to the minorities. In particular, the Hindu minority in Malaysia is one of the most economically deprived community in the country. And they face regular discrimination in terms of their religious rights. Their religious rights are restricted. Their temples are destroyed. Since independence, more than 10,000 Hindu temples or shrines have been either destroyed or forcibly relocated under the guise of government development. Now, this does not happen to any other religious community in Malaysia. You don't see Malaysian Muslim mosques being relocated for business development. You only see it happening to Hindu temples. Hindus also face discrimination in terms of marriage rights or in terms of family matters. When there's a situation where a Hindu has been married, and in particular a Hindu woman, and her husband converts to Islam, that wife is then forced to adjudicate in the Sharia Islamic courts the future of their children, because that husband now has the right to convert their children to Islam without permission of the mother. So these are some of the other discrimination and religious restrictions that Hindus face in Malaysia. So what have we been able to do about it? Now, obviously there's still a lot to be done, but we've made some strides in bringing this issue to the attention of US policymakers. We sponsored events for human rights leader of the Hindu Rights Action Force in Malaysia, Waitha Murthy, on Capitol Hill. We've highlighted the plight of Malaysian Hindus with the State Department, with the US Commission on International Religious Freedom, which used to be only focused on Christian rights internationally, with Congress and senators. Again, Pakistan, I won't talk too much about because my colleague has already spoken about it. But just to talk about some of the things that we talked about on Pakistan, when you hear about human rights on Pakistan, Christian groups are very active in the US, both in terms of lobbying and religious freedom forums and in other areas. And they have successfully brought the plight of Christian minorities in Pakistan, which is a fact, Christians are suffering in Pakistan, but they have successfully brought that plight to the attention of policymakers and have effectively been able to raise their cause. Previously, in years past, you would never hear even the mention of Hindus in Pakistan. You may hear about Ahmadiyas, about Christians, but you would never hear about Hindus. So we've hosted multiple congressional briefings on the plight of Hindus in Pakistan. And we've done it in a way that we've done it in collaboration with other organizations. So we make it seem that it's not just a Hindu issue, but it's a general human rights issue in Pakistan. We've had multiple congressmen spearhead letters on the rights of Hindu women in Pakistan, Hindu girls who are forcibly kidnapped and converted to Islam on a monthly basis. And we've forced the State Department to take these issues into consideration in their relations with Pakistan. Now, obviously, a lot of other issues have affected relations between the US and Pakistan, but we're making impacts. We're making impact on the appropriations of money that's going to Pakistan. So when we look at the importance of influencing US policy, a few issues I'd like to highlight, or a few strategies I'd like to highlight. One is working with policy leaders and think tanks to define policy objectives for Hindus. Think tanks and research institutes often define what are the important policy objectives for the policymakers, for those that are in power, for the senators, for the congressmen. So besides going to the halls of Congress and the State Department, meeting with these think tank experts and making sure that they talk about these issues as well. And that then trickles down to what the policymakers are talking about. Advocating for action from government bodies to improve human rights conditions. Unfortunately, human rights often is the last thing that's discussed when it comes to bilateral relations with several countries from the US perspective. So making sure that these issues are constantly discussed and demanding action from government bodies, but couching it in a language that it comes down to the bare US national interest. And finally, coordinating with coalitions to establish broad bases of support for change. And this is important, that we have to find allies wherever we can. We may not agree with them on 100% of the issues, but where we can find common cause with certain organizations or other groups that have suffered similarly to the Hindu community worldwide, we have to form those coalitions. Because once we have a voice and we bring that voice together with other voices, we can only strengthen the voice of our own Hindu brothers and sisters that are suffering around the world. Thank you very much.